Happy Thursday morning, everyone. Hope you have had a fantastic week. I tell you, talk about hectic. Things just keep growing and growing and growing. People are getting excited about covenant eschatology all over the world. I heard just recently that plans are in the works to have. I wish I could be there. I don't guess I can. But the very first preterist conference in Norway. Think about that. I mean, look, covenant eschatology is spreading everywhere. Okay. Well, here we are on Thursday. We are continuing our study of the connection between resurrection and kingdom. Paul said, flesh and blood shall not inherit the kingdom of heaven. Which obviously is kind of interesting. People describe that flesh and blood there as physical bodies, okay, and they turn around and say, we're going to have a physical body resurrection at the end of time, entrance into the kingdom. Well, wait a minute. If flesh and blood doesn't enter the kingdom, then if we have a physical body resurrection, doesn't that mean that physical flesh and blood body doesn't get to enter the kingdom? Yeah, I understand the argument. People say, oh, well, it's changed. Well, physical flesh and blood, which in the first place is not what Paul's talking about there, but physical flesh and blood is what everyone's arguing for. A physical resurrection. Well, I digress. Okay, I want to share with you one of the last passages in the Gospels that I want to examine. The connection between resurrection and kingdom. In Matthew 25:31 and following, when the Son of Man comes in His glory and all of the holy angels with Him, then He will sit on the throne of His glory. Well, here's the coming of the Son of Man. Everyone says it's the time of the judgment. Everyone says it's the time of the resurrection. Well, guess what? He sits on the throne of His glory. He doesn't quit the throne. He sits on the throne. It's a continuation, a consummation of what was initiated at His ascension when He ascended to the right hand of the Father, there to rule in the midst of His enemies, and then to return in judgment of those enemies, Luke chapter 19. But here we have, right here, the coming of the Son of Man and being seated on the throne. It's the kingdom. And what does Jesus say as He judges? Those who have fed the poor, given drink to the thirsty, fed the naked and the destitute, the King will say to those on His right hand, come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Folks, there we have it. We have all of the constituent elements of 1 Corinthians 15 right here. Coming of the Son of Man. The glorious enthronement. The judgment. Resurrection. And the kingdom. Now, follow this. This coming of the Lord of Matthew 25:31 and following is the coming of the Lord of Matthew 25, 1 through 13. The coming of the bridegroom for His wedding. Right? The wedding is the second coming. Matthew 25:31 is the second coming, as people use that vernacular. Well, when would the wedding be? In Matthew chapter 22, Jesus told a parable. He said, a man made a great wedding feast for his son, and he sent out his servants to call those who had already been invited. They began with one accord to make excuses. They mistreated those servants. They beat them. They rejected them. They killed them. And the master of the wedding was angry, and he sent out his servants. And he killed those wicked men and burned their city. Any doubt whatsoever about what that's about? That's the fall of Jerusalem. What happens next? The master said to his servants, go out into the highways and the byways, and to gather into my hall, so that my wedding banquet might be full. The wedding takes place at the destruction of the city. Okay, so what do we have? Oh, by the way, the wedding is kingdom through and through and through and through. I don't have time to go into that. So here in Matthew 25:31 and following, we have the coming of Christ, the enthronement, the consummation of his kingdom, the perfection of his kingdom, judgment, resurrection, all the nations of the earth are gathered before him, and the kingdom. All of this would take place at the coming of the Lord for the wedding, Matthew 25, 1-13. But the wedding would be when those wicked men who rejected the invitation to the wedding were destroyed. And oh, by the way, the wedding would take place at the coming of the Lord against Babylon. Revelation chapter 19. At the destruction of Babylon, the cry went out, let us be glad and rejoice, for the time of the wedding has come. And it's also the time of salvation and the kingdom. Revelation 19:1. Oh, it's at the time of the vindication of the martyrs. Verse 2. Do you see the correlations here? Once again, folks, the connection between resurrection, entrance into the kingdom, all of this is right here in Matthew chapter 25. This coming of the Lord for judgment, coming of the Lord at the kingdom, coming of the Lord at the resurrection is at the time of the wedding. The time of the wedding would be at the fall of Jerusalem. It would be at the judgment of Babylon, the city where the Lord was slain. Revelation 11, verse 8. These connections are perfect. They are powerful. They are persuasive if we have an open mind. Let me recommend that you get a copy of my book, The Resurrection of Daniel, chapter 12, verse 2, Fulfilled or Future. You will find an incredible amount of information, documentation, proof that this entrance into the kingdom of 1 Corinthians 15 at the resurrection was in AD 70, as we've just demonstrated this morning. Go to my website, donkpreston.com or BibleProphecy.com. Order the book. You'll be glad that you did. Send me a note saying you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and I'll refund your shipping, which will be $5. And you'll be glad. You will be glad you ordered the book. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this morning's Morning Musings. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic weekend. Please be safe. We'll see you, Lord willing, next Monday.